Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. So I'm really excited for tonight's episode. For this interview, I have back with me historian, scholar, and author, and critic, Dan Vogel. Dan, thanks for coming back on my
Well,
channel.
thanks for having me.
Yeah,
It's good to be with you again and discuss some of these topics that you're
yeah, we,
interested
we
in.
had a really good interview and discussion last time. It was an epic 7-hour interview.
Yeah.
We had to split into 3 parts. We talked about folk magic, the 19th century magical worldview, Joe Smith's Seer Stone. We talked about his engagement in treasure digging. We talked about the angel and the gold plates, 1826 Glasgow trial, and Book of Mormon translation. And we touched a bit on apologetics. So it was a pretty in-depth and pretty thorough interview on that. So I think any listeners who haven't seen that, I would go back and check it out. But those interviews did really well on my channel. I got the most views I think I've gotten, loads of new
Oh,
subscribers. So that was a huge success for me, and I really
good.
appreciated the time that Dan, spent to come on and to have that dialogue. And the majority, I would say, of the feedback was all really positive from different people. So that was
Yeah.
really awesome. You would think that we'd covered everything in those 7 hours, but I have a few follow-up questions, and there was one or two listeners that felt, oh, it was very critical. Now, Dan is a critic, and I wanted to hear his perspective, his interpretation. I think that's good to hear, both sides, and to be balanced and to see what critics have to say, what apologists have to say. But I'm going to ask a few follow-up questions, maybe from an apologetic stance, just in some of our discussion. And Dan's okay with that. Oh, and by the way, check out Dan's books. He's the author of Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet. I'll put the link in the description. He's also written a book, Book of Abraham Apologetics. That came out last year, I believe. And you've
Yes.
written an 8-volume series on early Mormon documents. So I'll put the links in those. Check out his books. He's a great author and historian and scholar. And he also has a YouTube channel, Dan Vogel, and he has 2 videos on the witnesses. I think one on 3 witnesses and one on the 8 witnesses, I believe.
Yep.
So some of
Uh-huh.
this interview will be probably building off of that, but check out those and support Dan in his great work that he's doing. Awesome. So before
Thank
we
you.
go on to the 3, because the witnesses is going to be the main discussion of tonight, but we'll just ask a few follow-ups on the folk magic, Deerstone, treasure digging topic that we had. And this is going to be more of just a quick sort of firing round. We're not going to go back into it. If you missed it, go back and watch those. So I was doing a little bit of digging after, and
Digging, huh?
a little bit of digging.
Well,
I
we're talking
won't
about
say,
money digging, so you did do
yeah, no
the
pun
treasure
intended.
digging.
A little bit of research, looking at, or maybe some apologetic responses to, our interview.
Uh-huh.
I've kind of read a little bit about the Richard Bushman ones, but when I went on Fair Mormon, they talked about, so, you talked about the Smith's neighbors sort of being like eyewitnesses, and a lot of the accounts of his treasure digging and, magical rituals and animal sacrifices. There's not really anything firsthand from the Smiths, but from the neighbors. But you said, as a historian, you shouldn't just dismiss those, even if they're antagonistic, of course, like if they're shortly after the fact and if they're eyewitnesses, that makes it more credible. But apologists would say, well, how reliable are those accounts if some of the Smiths' neighbors, for example, in the Hurlburt Affidavits, talked about the Smiths, being lazy, or the Solomon Spaulding manuscript being like the source for the Book of Mormon, when I think most historians and even critics would reject that theory. So they seem almost critical of the Smiths. I think they also talk about Sidney Rigdon meeting Joseph before that period, but I think that
Yeah.
goes into the
Yeah.
historical record. So I guess the point apologists would make is, should we be cautious or skeptical of some of those neighbors if they've made claims that seem to either be wrong or embellished at other times? What would be your response to that? Like, should we accept those accounts? I think nobody would deny that Joe Smith was a treasure digger, but could they be embellishing when they talk about, like, the sort of like the conjuring elements being like Lumen Walters, animal sacrifices? What would be your response to that?
Well, there's kind of a mixture of 2 questions in there. One of them is, can we rely on Philastus Hurlburt
Yes.
collecting the documents is he reliable? Because he collected these statements from the Smith's neighbors in Manchester and Palmyra, New York, but he also collected this other group of documents about the Spalding manuscript being the source of the Book of Mormon, which no one takes as credible evidence anymore.
Right.
And so the implication has been, since Richard Anderson wrote his article in the 1970s on the Hurlburt documents, that Hurlburt influenced the writing of these affidavits. And
because I'm right in thinking he was an early convert, but was he excommunicated for
yeah,
something, or he left the church, so he maybe had a bit of an axe to grind.
yeah. So how much did Philestus Hurlburt have to do with these documents? Do we really need to look at Philestus Hurlburt to judge these documents, or do these documents just stand on their own and he just collected them?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's just a collector. It doesn't matter who he is, whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, it really doesn't matter if the people that he collected documents from stand by their documents. And the only one thing you might bring up is, did Philestus Hurlburt just go and look for bad testimony, people that would testify the way he was looking for, and avoided anybody that would say good things? You know, so there's that kind of bias can influence who he decided to interview, but what the witnesses said when they were being interviewed is on their own. And it didn't, and that, if that's the case, it doesn't matter about Hurlburt. Okay, so you get in the money digging thing. The thing that Quinn brought out in his book was that a lot of the things that the Hurlburt witnesses testified to are corroborated by Mormon sources like Joseph Knight Sr. and also other statements that appear with Hurlburt's affidavits, like the ones from Harmony, Pennsylvania. Isaac Hale.
So he collected affidavits both from Palmyra and Harmony, Pennsylvania.
He did. But what happened was that the affidavit he collected from Isaac Hale had gotten lost. And E.D. Howe had to write Isaac Hale and get another statement. So the one that E.D. Howe published with Hurlburt's documents actually isn't the one that Hurlburt got from Isaac Hale. It's the one that E.D. Howe wrote to Hale and got himself.
Oh,
so yeah, separately, it was mailed to E.D. Howe to replace the lost statement he had given Hurlburt. So there's that question, and the idea is that probably the most reliable source on the money digging that we have is the 1826 trial record.
Yeah,
that was published.
Disputed.
Well, it is. Some people have tried to get around it. There was, a denial. We know that.
Well, I think the Stoddards, don't they? They probably deny it, but I know the church even has it. I actually read an article on the church's website, which I didn't even know was there. It's in like a topic section called the 1826 glass liquor trial, and pretty much most of what we discussed, obviously it was more condensed, was in there, which I thought at least they're owning up to it and being transparent. I had to do a little bit of digging to come across it, but so even the church acknowledges it.
It's very hard to deny it. Some people, like I said, do. Hugh Nibley came out early in denying it because it was only published, in Utah in 1886, and it was by the justice's niece. Albert Neely was the justice that held that trial, or actually it was a preliminary hearing, and she had either taken the whole his docket book, or she tore it out of the book, or she could maybe have copied it. and taken it to Utah, but it was published independently 3 different times.
Yeah.
Some people tried to say that's a forgery for what various reasons. I don't think it was a forgery, because if an anti-Mormon tried to forge that document, it's very doubtful that they would put Isaac Hale on the witness stand testifying that Joseph Smith did indeed have powers to find treasures. He knows Joseph
Yeah,
Smith has
Josiah
the power.
Stoll. Yeah,
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 Josiah Stoll and a Jonathan Thompson also
yeah.
said that he knows that they had found trunks of treasure, and the trunk had slipped away in the earth, and that's why they didn't get it.
Yeah, it wasn't
So
a purely antagonistic,
no,
biased against the Smith, which you would think if it was forged and to discredit him.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, if it was forged to discredit him, why would they put stuff like that in there?
exactly.
So but it was, so for many years it was like questioned, like by Hugh Nibley. Oh, it was just published, we don't have any original, at the bottom of the published transcription were the itemized prices or costs that the Neely and the constable sent to the Chenango County to get reimbursed, and it gave these amounts. And then when Reverend Walters, and I think it was in the 70s, actually found the bills. He didn't find the transcript. He found the bills that Neely and the constable Dzang sent to Chenango County to be reimbursed, and the amounts were exact.
Yeah.
So it substantiated the published version. So anyway, in that is
that's the strongest evidence.
This is probably, I think, the strongest evidence, because it's sworn statements by critics and believers of Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith himself. Joseph Smith also testified, but he wasn't under oath because he's a defendant. He doesn't have to be under oath in a preliminary hearing, especially. So, but he did get I don't know if there was a witness stand, but because I don't know if it was a courthouse or somebody's house, but he said under the questioning of Neely that he admitted that he'd been doing it for 3 years, and that he had never solicited the business. It's always been asked of him. See, this is kind of setting up his defense. And he had rather give it up, more recently, because it hurt his eyes so much, because he was putting the stone in the hat and doing that kind of thing, and leading people to spots. Well, Josiah Stoll's testimony, though, named about 5 places. It gave names of exact places where Joseph Smith had led them to dig for treasure along the Susquehanna River, and I looked for every single one of those, and I discussed it and wrote about it in my various articles and in my biography of Smith. And one was Bend Mountain, and Bend Mountain was at the bend of the Susquehanna River, right where it turns, and where it turns is right where Harmony, Pennsylvania is. It's now called Oakland, and they've reconstructed Joseph Smith's home and everything there. It's quite a place. I haven't been there, but I've seen photographs, and the cemeteries there with Joseph Smith's, firstborn had died, who they named Alvin. Died. It was either a stillborn or died shortly after birth.
And not to interrupt you, but I know we covered the 1826 Glasgow trial quite early in the last one. I guess to put a fine point on my question is, we know that he was involved in treasure digging. My just question is, if some of these accounts from some of the neighbors or the eyewitnesses of, like, say, animal sacrifices, or the magical elements that might sound a bit like disturbing and troubling to certainly a believer, if they're coming from people who are maybe making claims such as, like, the Solomon Spalding manuscript is the source, could they be embellishing? Are these super reliable, or do you believe that they're still credible statements of those elements being involved in his treasure digging? I think that's more sort of like the.
Okay, and for the Hurlburt ones,
Mhm.
the Spalding ones should not be confused with the ones that he collected. The Spalding doesn't prove that Hurlburt was dishonest or anything. It only proves because they were actually the relatives of Spalding had read the Book of Mormon and thought it was similar to a manuscript they heard read to them 15 years earlier, and so they were making the claims independent of Hurlburt.
Right.
And Hurlburt
Okay.
was drawn to them to get the affidavits. They were mistaken, though. I believe they
Yeah.
were suffering from, you know, I can't think of the term right now, but it's a well-known term where your memory can be fooled and into thinking it's an actual memory, where it's a vague memory can become clearer in time and telling, to the point where you actually think you heard the Book of Mormon read, you know.
Yeah.
And so they made a lot of mistakes. And one of the big mistakes is that they thought the Book of Mormon was about the lost 10 tribes. And the Book of Mormon's not about the lost 10 tribes. So they remembered hearing something that they thought was like the Book of Mormon, but they didn't know what the Book of Mormon was really all about. So their memories are corrupted by
Right. Yeah.
current information about the Book of Mormon. And it's all honest. It's not like they're trying to be dishonest or anything. It happens all the time in testimony in courts and places where, you know, there's a whole thing that uncovered false memory syndrome in court trials of child molestations, and it goes on and on. It's a well-documented thing, and a lady called Elizabeth Loftus is the one that kind of pioneered this kind of research in psychology, and she has testified a lot in these court hearings about false memory syndrome. So it's a perfect place to study that. But I believe that's what the Spalding witnesses are suffering from. But later Spalding, I believe some of them were kind of pious frauds, but
Okay.
you know, trying to add to it. But the relatives of Spalding, I think, were honestly mistaken and have been victims of false memory syndrome. Now, so that doesn't really cast a shadow on the documents he collected in the Palmyra, Manchester area. And some of them, what they did was, I don't believe they all got together and tried to lie about it, but
like a big conspiracy.
Their problem was more of hiding their involvement. You know, William Stafford admitted that he tried to make it sound like they asked him, and he went to the Smiths and they dug, and William Stafford, well, Willard Chase is kind of suppressing information about himself and his sister, that they were actually involved in the money digging themselves. It wasn't just Joseph Smith doing it. They were partners. They were digging. And
she had a stone, and you said he was a Presbyterian, so he
was a Methodist.
Oh,
He was a Methodist clergy, actually.
Okay.
Lay clergy. According to the census, I think it was the 1840 census, maybe, said that he was a Methodist clergy, or I forget the exact wording, but so Willard Chase, his sister, had a stone, and the stone, Joseph Smith's stone, was found while they were, what Willard Chase said, they were digging a well in 1822 on their property.
Yeah.
He and Alvin and Joseph, and that he found the stone and he brought it up, and Joseph said, "Let me see it." And he put the stone in his hat and he looked in it and saw what he thought were treasures. And he then he gave the stone back, but then later he came to Chase and asked to borrow the stone. And Chase then accused him of not returning his stone. Well, but he didn't regard it as anything more than a curiosity.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
He's trying to divorce himself from the activity, that he's trying to put on Joseph Smith some kind of a bad reputation for being involved in money digging, because it didn't have such a positive look on Joseph Smith's later activities as a prophet.
Yeah.
And he knew that he used that stone to translate the Book of Mormon and find the plates. According to Willard Chase, he goes, Joseph had said without the stone he couldn't have found the plates.
Yeah.
So the whole plates and treasure digging and recovering the plates from the hill was all told originally in a money digging context that made perfect sense to his fellow money diggers, including his father, who was a money digger also.
Yeah.
The coming out forth of the plates in that context made perfect sense to them. Joseph Smith later went on to change the emphasis of his story to be more Christian, more an angel, not a spirit. He kind of suppressed. Joe Smith did some suppressing of the story himself too. It wasn't just Willard Chase. Joe Smith suppressed the idea that how did he find the treasure? Well, it was impressed on his mind while he was talking to Moroni. And when he went there, he recognized the place. Well, he couldn't mention the stone had helped him find the treasure, because the stone disappears from the story entirely. He doesn't. Yeah. We all know from the Mormon witnesses that Joseph Smith used that stone in the hat to translate the Book of Mormon, but you don't find any of that mentioned in Joseph Smith's history. So he's doing his own massaging of his story. Also, everybody is
more religious version. I do have a question with regards to what you're saying about so your view is that the angel in the gold plates story evolves out of a guardian spirit guarding treasure. An apologist, I never actually thought of this, so one apologetic pushback to that, and I want to just hear your response, is it possible, because I think a lot of these are secondhand accounts from the neighbors being told this by either Joseph Smith Sr. or Joseph Smith, and they said, well, what if because of their magical worldview, what if they heard about a messenger with gold plates, and what if they just interpret it as a spirit guarding treasure, and maybe Joseph didn't just evolve it? What would you think to that sort of response? Maybe that's just how they're interpreting the angel and gold plates because of their worldview of guardian spirits and treasure.
They're calling it the spirit of an old man with a beard. So the reason why Joseph Smith changes it to an angel that has a body, is because he doesn't want people thinking that he was a necromancer. Which people thought he was a necromancer, talking to spirits and invoking spirits. And that's what those magic parchments and the Jupiter talisman are all about, controlling the spirits. And going to the hill at the fall equinox.
I watched your video on Mormonism Live with RFM and Maven about that.
So the first time that Lucy's kind of careful to call it the messenger. She uses the term messenger, not really angel. And the earliest time when he's gets a name, Moroni, or he changes it to Nephi. You remember that part of the discussion, but the earliest time he gets even named, I'm trying to remember when it was, but it's like a lot later before you get a name. Even DMC 20 only talks about the angel, no name or anything until much later. It might even be Albert Cowdery's 1834-35 history, where he says Moroni. I think that might be. Anyway, there's accounts. So Willard Chase says Joseph Smith Sr. called it as the spirit, and Abner Cole said it was the spirit turned into an angel, later became an angel.
Oh, so Abner Cole is saying that it changed from a spirit
Yeah,
to an angel. It
right.
evolved or got embellished or
Yeah,
religionized.
right. So then early interviews of Martin Harris report that he had called it a spirit.
Not an angel. Okay.
Right. Um, so as I explained on Mormonism Live was that I think the problem with saying Nephi in the early manuscript of the official history, the 1838-39 history, is that Nephi would have been around to be resurrected at Jesus's resurrection, but Moroni would have been after. So
Yeah.
he didn't have a body if you use Moroni, and he used Moroni until the 1838 account, and then all of a sudden it's Nephi. And I don't think it was it could be a mistake, like some people argue, but I don't think so. I think it's more intentional that he was experimenting with the name Nephi because Nephi would have a body, and he's trying to get away from the magic thing and the necromancy. And he doesn't mention the stone. So the 1838 history is kind of a more Protestant version of this story. And it's not just it's a bunch of little things that are changing. This introduction of this Urim and Thummim, part, and suppressing of the stone and the hat part of the story.
Yeah.
So just days before or after he just said Nephi, I think that's how it works. He then says in the question and answers in the journal, Elders Journal in Missouri, that's where they're at dictating the history at the beginning. He says that the plates in answering questions that people ask him constantly, he mentions that Moroni appeared to him and that Moroni had been resurrected. So it would have had to have been a special resurrection. But the clue I get from that is that he's concerned with the body, that there's a body. To mention Moroni, who had been resurrected, appeared to me.
Right.
And showed me where the plates were.
Because if it was a spirit, then that would be necromancy, which the Bible sort of frowned upon that. There's scriptures that pretty much say that's, kind of the devil's work, so to speak.
Yeah, and so he's trying to make his story more appealing to Protestant readers.
And because of those early accounts, so you probably don't buy that response from apologists saying that, oh, maybe they were always telling it was the angel, but maybe his neighbors just thought or just interpret it as, oh, a spirit guarding treasure. You think it did evolve?
Yeah. It's trying to reverse it onto the people that are reporting what Joseph Smith Sr. said. You would have to have a bunch of people all making the same mistake due to their money digging. And they're not, Harris, I don't think Harris was a money digger, but in the interviews, he says spirit, and he's reported that way. And it's what you would expect in that situation. So I also follow Willard Chase's account of Joseph Smith Sr. saying that there's something like a toad.
Yeah, we talked about that last time.
In the bottom, and that it rose up into a man that struck him.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more an operation for spirits and things money digging. It's in that money digging context.
Yeah, although it sounds ridiculous, that's sort of
Yeah.
like common folklore, isn't it? Like magical folklore. Would you call them
Changing
shape shifters or
shapes.
something? They morph from like a toad
Yeah.
to a man or something.
Yeah. And creatures and spirits can, like, that you remember that story of Harris, riding in the wagon, and the devil appears as a deer.
I thought it was Jesus as a deer or walking beside him. Maybe I'm thinking of another instance.
No, well,
No?
but I could have it wrong. My memory is not perfect.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I
so,
think I
but
remember
he
one
sees a
part like
deer.
in the form of a deer.
Whatever.
Hmm.
It's uh, a being appearing as in a different shape.
Okay.
But I thought it was the devil in the shape of a deer. So that would be a spirit in shape of a deer. And changing shapes. And I mentioned last time, I believe, the story of David Whitmer saying he sensed that the messenger was under the shed. And I don't picture some spirit under the shed. It was probably,
He'd be pretty
it,
squashed if he was.
well, to me, it probably better understood in the context of that something like a toad, thing under
Unless
the
maybe he thought
shed.
like spirits could be underground, maybe. I don't know, I'm just speculating.
Okay.
Anyway, okay.
So anyway, the animal sacrifice, and I think we touched on last time that
Mhm.
Joseph Smith believed in the restoration of animal sacrifice. M. It was William Stafford that said that they had borrowed his sheep, and that was the only time they made money digging a profitable business. And so he's an eyewitness and a participant.
I think the Lewises also talk about animal sacrifice, if I'm remembering correct. That's Emma's cousins. I think they claim that Joseph did animal
Yeah,
sacrifices.
they did. They're also on the farm of Joseph Knight Sr., the Emily Colburn, is sister of Sally Knight, Newell Knight's wife. Emily Colburn talked about how they offered a dog as a sacrifice at Joseph Smith's direction. So this was the magic worldview,
Mm.
and I don't think it proves that Joseph Smith. I'm not trying to use it to disprove Joseph Smith isn't some
Prophet.
kind of prophet.
Yeah, yeah, got you.
I just want to know what his story is, and it could be anything.
Mm.
Okay. So, but that he came out of this cultural money digging culture, and Mike Quinn took great pains to show how it did come out of it, but did not disprove Joseph Smith's claim as being a prophet.
Yeah, okay.
It might be us that have to adjust,
Mm.
and our story of some,
Nuancing or accepting sort of the historical record.
some kind of pure version of Joseph Smith being knowing everything from the beginning. And
Yeah.
it's just it might be strange to our ears because we're from another culture,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And
Okay. Awesome. Next follow-up question. I want these to be these are just sort of like quick firing ones. So you talked about that you believe the plates were tin plates. This maybe jump into a different section, but tin plates.
Yeah.
Because you hold a naturalistic worldview, you don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical, therefore no angel Moroni, no real gold plates. And apologists might push back and say that that's sort of theory. Well, I think that probably it's probably the best
Speculation.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, speculation, I think their quote, and that comes out of your naturalistic worldview. You don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical, so you have to come up with the way, how did he do it? And they would say, well, there's no evidence, well, that I'm aware of him, purchasing tin or being skilled to make the plates, or like nobody was suspicious of him, nobody claimed. So they would say this just comes out of your naturalistic worldview, it's speculation. What would just be your response to that?
Well, it's speculation that there are gold plates underneath the cloth as well. There's just as much evidence. So I'm not using it as evidence against Joseph Smith. I'm just saying that the way to tell what was under the cloth, is it tembaga? The gold mixed with
It's copper alloy or something, isn't it?
copper alloy. There's a lot of problems with that theory, though, but I won't go into right now. But or is it tin? It's tin matches the weight.
Yeah,
Of
I think
what
they
is
argue
in the cloth.
Tumbaga matches it as well, if I'm right in thinking.
Sort of,
Sort of.
depending on what the content of the copper is.
Like the
Okay.
percentage of gold
Yeah.
or copper. Okay.
And if it's a high content of copper, you're going to have a lot of corrosion. Most of the tembaga in museums have been cleaned up. It's a very complex thing to describe, but how they made tembaga is it can become highly corrosive quickly. So so the higher the copper content, it's going to create a lot of trouble when you try to see them, that they were in this hill, and exposed to elements more or less for 1400 years or whatever it was. So if it's a high content of gold, you're going to get a lot. The weight is going to become pretty heavy fast.
Yeah, above the, was it 60 to 80 pounds, the witnesses
40 to
estimate it was?
60.
Oh, 40 to 60.
40 to
Okay.
60.
Right.
So
Like a heavy dumbbell.
it's more on the low end. You have Emma moving them around when she's dusting, while they're covered in this or contained in a sack maybe. But so the way to find out whether what was underneath the cloth is to decide whether the Book of Mormon is historical or not.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Because that's where you should be focused. The witnesses really don't provide all that great of evidence for the Book of Mormon by themselves, because they're spiritual experiences, as I have reconstructed the 8 witnesses, and the
And we'll
3
talk about that
witnesses had a
more.
vision.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
That's
more
where we're
in a bit,
going.
but that's where we're going. But I know you would probably, and in fairness to you, I think you talk about this in your video, but even, we know loads of people in other religions have claimed spiritual experiences, visions, hallucinations. So I would agree with you. They don't constitute proof. Maybe they shouldn't be, I think, dismissed, and apologists might see that there may be credible statements. But you're right. Like, you kind of see it as if the Book of Mormon's historical. Maybe we'll talk about the Book of Mormon historicity and your view on how it was composed. That could be, I think, a separate interview. That could be really fun as well. But I think from an apologetic standpoint, they might say, well, maybe there is some plausible evidence, Nahum, Bountiful. I think they're talking about Mulek being like a shortened version for, was it Malachi or something, the Old Testament, so, and LiDAR technology. So they maybe say, oh, maybe there's some plausible evidence, but it can't be proven historical, so to speak. But they would just see it as, your assumption, you believe it's not historical, so therefore, it's all a hallucination, and it must have been tin plates. It would sort of be like their thought on you. That's how you explain it away. And we'll talk more about the witnesses in a wee bit. Any last comment before I ask?
Well, so Joe Smith didn't have to be a great metallurgist or anything to construct plates. It's been replicated. Several people have made these tin plates. There was a tinsmith
William
interview.
Strang, was it James Strang?
Oh, well, James Strang made his own fake plates that could
Yeah,
be actually,
I suppose there's the Kinderhook plates as well that were
yeah, the Kinderhook
hatched
plate.
on. So I suppose fake plates have
Yeah.
been invented.
So Joe Smith wouldn't have to. There's various forms of tin in his environment. And one interesting one was shingles on roofs, that they had shingles that nearly just the size, but a little bit longer than what Joe Smith described, that could be cut down, and they used tin, and he could salvage tin from various places. They made buckets with them. They put them on roofs. You could buy tin objects. The candle holders, the lantern kind of things, they would make themselves, or some tinsmith. There's tinsmiths around all over the place, but it could have been pipes, stove pipes, salvaged tin to be put together. This is theoretical, of course. How would he do it? How would he go about doing it? Did he do it? All that kind of stuff. And I believe it's plausible that he could. It's not beyond his abilities or out of impossible from his environment. It wouldn't be pure tin either. It would be more like iron coated with tin.
Yeah.
If it were domestically made, made in the USA of A, So so I believe that it's quite possible. So then how do you talk about the witnesses? How did the witnesses actually experience the plates? And so the 3 witnesses were visionary. It was a visionary experience. And the 8 witnesses, their written testimony is vague and some of the wording very awkward. And since the 8 witnesses, some of them died quite early. So most of the statements from the 3 witnesses are made later in life and recorded late in life. And a lot of the 8 witnesses didn't live that long. John Whitmer lived the longest, I believe it was. And
yeah, because whenever I looked for like statements from 8 witnesses in preparation for this interview, most of them were from John Whitmer.
yeah. Well, we have some early stuff. And of course, all the sources are not perfect. They're not like made to answer our questions. So the 8 witnesses, statements taken from the 8 witnesses, where they say, more or less they stand by their statement in the testimony, becomes a circular kind of thing. Like, well, what did they mean when they said they handled and saw them? There's no detail. Okay, handled and saw them. It doesn't even say that they turned the pages. It just says, as many of the leaves as the said Joe Smith translated, we did handle with our hands. It doesn't say each one individually, so, but people read it that way.
Yeah, that's probably the way I would have read it and understood it.
Yeah. So the language is quite, not transparent. It's kind of obtuse.
Okay.
It's
So maybe we could talk about the 3
opaque.
witnesses first. So it was Martin Harris,
Yes.
David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, and I'd say most of my listeners would be familiar with the testimony of the 3 and the 8 witnesses, but at the start of the Book of Mormon, you have the testimony of the 3 witnesses who went to like the woods by it's the Peter Whitmer property, and they were praying together, and it talks about how they prayed, they had like a vision, they saw the angel, he turned the gold plates, and they heard the voice of God, and they beheld it by the power of God, and they sort of bared their testimony to the world. Now, I believe in Joseph Smith's history that Martin Harris he separated from them. They were praying, nothing was happening. Martin left, maybe he felt he didn't have enough faith. So then Oliver and David Whitmer and Joseph Smith claimed to see the angel first. And then when Joseph went to Martin after then he saw the angel, them two together. Could you talk a little bit about the witnesses almost before they see the angel? Because in your video you talk a little bit about, how they are chosen as the witnesses of the gold plate. The Book of Mormon prophesies, I believe, in, is it Ether 5 and Second Nephi? I think it's in D&C 5 as well, that there'll be three witnesses who'll testify of the gold plates. You'll see them by the power of God. Could you talk a little about how the witnesses meet Joseph Smith and how they're chosen and what leads up to then this event of them seeing the angel in the plates?
Yeah, well, the Book of Mormon talks about it in Ether, and in Second Nephi 27, I think it is.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was the witnesses' experience happened in June of 1829, and this was towards the end of the translation. So the Ether talks about witnesses, and I forget the exact wording there, but the statement in Second Nephi 27 is specifically about three witnesses. And of course, by the time this is dictated, possibly it's already happened.
So you think Second Nephi 27 could have been dictated possibly after?
After.
Okay, but it was prophesied in Ether, either by
Ether, that there shall be witnesses.
Yeah.
I was trying to hesitate here because I can't remember.
I'm checking if I have the scripture.
Does it mention three? But in the mouth of two or three witnesses, kind of the idea is what it's supposed to fulfill.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to the 1838 history that you referred to, where it mentions that Martin Harris saw them separately, that was news to a lot of people, even members probably. Who knows what they were saying privately in meetings, but
because you talk about in your video that when you read the testimony of the three witnesses, and to be fair, I think I probably would have read it that way as well growing up. You would have thought all three of them were together.
Well, it doesn't even mention Joseph Smith being there.
Yeah, that's true.
The angel comes and shows these three witnesses, shows us three the plates, and we heard the voice of God testifying that they were translated by the gift and power of God, kind of a thing. So these are like generalized statements that they could agree with enough to sign. The same thing with the 8. It's a generalized statement with very vague details, and they can agree enough to sign it. Okay. And it's, so I'm saying, what I'm arguing is, so with the three witnesses, you get the impression that they're all together, and Joseph Smith's not mentioned. They see an angel and come down and show them the plates, three of them together. You think it's how can three people see the same vision? And there is a possibility of three people seeing the same vision, not the exact same vision. They all have a visionary experience, but it's different, but they wouldn't know. I saw these gold plates. Who knows if they all saw the same plates or the same angel or the same table behind the angel or wherever it was with other objects that they were promised to see.
I wasn't like the Leahona, the sort of Leoben interpreters also on the table. I think, was it David Whitmer and Martin Harris maybe, and other quotes talk about seeing different objects, but in the official testimony it's just the angel and
just the angel. The table's not mentioned. It doesn't say what the angel looked like or what and it doesn't give you any clue as to how visionary this was, which led Richard Anderson to assert that it was a supernatural experience. which means everything was the same in the woods or the field, wherever they were, in Fayette, New York, right? By the Peter Whitmer farmhouse. And the angel just came down and nothing was changed in the environment. The angel just was added to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And he was there physically, as if anybody came around, they could see the angel, So that's a natural, supernatural experience. But as you learn about the witnesses, even though they said, "Oh, it was all just as natural. I saw them with my eyes," and that it's very clear that they had seen a visionary. It was a more visionary than you would be led to believe. So, and I'll get to that in a little while. So we're learning something about these statements, that you can't just take the statements and from the statements reconstruct what historically happened. You're making too many assumptions. You're on dangerous ground. And that's what I argue about the 8 witnesses, that we hardly have any other statements by the 8 witnesses. And we have to rely heavily on the printed document, the official statement that they made and signed, or whoever made it, whoever wrote it. One person wrote it. How it was written is probably, the best guess has been Oliver Cowdery wrote it, and they signed. But I'm saying that you're on dangerous ground if you're going to take that statement and reconstruct it. And like many artists depict it, or have depicted it, was that, here's the plates sitting on a stump, a tree stump, and they're all like turning the leaves, and there's a lot of assumptions behind that painting, and others that are similar that have come out after that one. That's a pretty famous painting. It's in the Book of Mormon they hand out.
I remember you said in the video that Richard Lloyd Anderson, I read through his article as well. He's your friend that you like to reference a lot. I think he's the late Richard Anderson. So you respond a lot to him.
Yes.
I think he's probably one of the primary apologists or former apologists for the witnesses. But you said that he quoted Lucy Mack Smith, but you said the citation isn't there. I found a quote from Lucy Smith on Fair Mormon. I think it comes from, maybe this is the quote you're referring to, if I can find it, but it talks about Lucy. I think it's in like her preliminary manuscript of her history or something like that, talking about the 8 witnesses. Are you aware of, is that the one?
Well, the 8 witnesses were in Manchester when it happened, and they went out to the grove.
Yeah.
And in one lecture Richard Anderson was giving, he said, and Joseph brought the plates to the grove and set them on a tree stump. And I'm going, no, there's no source that says that. And Richard Anderson admitted that he had put a detail from the painting into his description.
That wasn't in the quote.
Unintentionally.
Right.
And my point was how the artist rendering of the experience of the 8 witnesses has tainted our image of, or in mental reconstruction of what happened with the 8 witnesses, and we've put in facts in there, and we see the plates just sitting in the open, and it sounds, because there's not enough detail there, it sounds like a natural experience. It didn't have an angel,
Mm-hmm.
They didn't talk about how they saw the plates, just that they saw them and handled them. So the handling could be physical, but the seeing could be spiritual.
Yeah. You talk about that.
Which would fit with D&C 17, when it promised the 3 witnesses that you shall see them with the eye of faith. And even my servant Joseph has seen them with the eye of faith. So, and that's where Martin Harris goes overboard a little bit and says Joseph Smith never saw them either, uncovered because of that revelation. And so then you have a few weeks later, the 8 witnesses supposedly seeing them in a totally natural situation. So it seems a little out of place if that were the fact.
I've got the quote here from Lucy. Do you want me to read it?
Okay.
It
Sure.
just says, in a few days we were followed by Joseph and Oliver and the Whitmers, who came to make a visit and also to make some arrangements about getting the book printed soon. They all, that is the male part of the company, repaired to a little grove where it was customary for the family to offer up their secret prayers, as Joseph had been instructed that the plates would be carried there by one of the ancient Nephites. Here it was those 8 witnesses recorded in the Book of Mormon looked upon the plates, handled them, of which they bear witness in the title page of the Book of Mormon. After the witnesses returned to the house, angel again made his appearance to Joseph and received the plates from his hands. So is that the one he was referring to in the article?
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't remember the details right offhand here, but the quote I know well. And the quote is a very important quote because there's one of the apologists like to use a testimony by Wilhelm Poulson in the 1880s, which is the clearest statement about the experiences of the 8 witnesses, supposedly by an interview he had with John Whitmer. Now, when he published it, John Whitmer had died. Okay, and he also Wilhelm Poulson also published a separate interview he had with David Whitmer. And David Whitmer complained that Poulson had got a lot of things wrong in his interview with Poulson. Yeah. So, but Poulson is a favorite to quote because Poulson has John Whitmer stating that Joseph Smith handed the plates over to us uncovered and we turned the leaves. Well, Poulson is trying to fill in a gap in the testimony of the 8 witnesses. One problem is, so we have David Whitmer complaining, but John Whitmer can't because he's dead. Well, Poulson also says that the 8 witnesses saw the plates in the Smith home, not in the grove.
Poulson says that.
Yeah, in the home, 4 witnesses at a time.
Right.
So that's like a red flag. Hey, wait a minute. Lucy was there. She's in the home,
But doesn't Lucy say in that quote that it was 8 of them that went to the little grove near?
They left the house into the grove and then they came back and she's there the whole time. So Poulson, something's very wrong with Poulson's testimony.
Right. So you're saying that he's getting things wrong. Right.
Wrong. Okay. I think he's intentionally changing things to fill in a gap where the 8 witnesses, to make it more physical than what information that they actually have on hand in the 1880s.
Right.
And John Whitmer, even though he says, oh yeah, I handled the plates and I saw the plates, but he doesn't say how he handled them and how he saw them. He just, the statement, I handled them and I saw them. Two different things. So John Whitmer also testified in 1838, 39, I think it is. In 1839, he's in Missouri. And there's a whole episode actually that's happening over in Kirtland with the dissenters in 1838, where Martin Harris and other dissenters, Warren Parrish, former scribe of Joseph Smith, and they're all debating what they should do with the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith is a fallen prophet, they believe.
Yeah.
What should they do? But what should they do with the Book of Mormon? Should they still believe the Book of Mormon or not? And Martin Harris is there also as a dissenter, but he's one of the dissenters that says that they should hang on to the Book of Mormon, and he knows it's true. He's seen the plates many times before the angel thing, as he held them on his lap. This is reported by Stephen Burnett,
Yeah.
another one of the dissenters, who is shocked by what he hears. Says the last pillar of his faith came out because of what Martin Harris said, not in private, but in a public meeting to everybody in Kirtland, Ohio, that was there in the congregation. And twice he repeated it, and said that the 8 witnesses did not see the plates with their natural eyes, that no one had seen the plates with their natural eyes.
Uncovered.
Yeah, uncovered. So how did the 8 witnesses actually hesitated, according to Martin Harris, to sign the document, but were finally persuaded to do so? Well, because it was misleading when you read it, give it a superficial reading. So Harris, who knew the witnesses well, and he's making a public statement, so he could be challenged at any time. And Stephen Burnett reported it accurately because Warren Parrish published a similar account of these meetings in the local newspaper at the time, 1838. So it's not just an isolated Stephen Burnett thing. It's actual historical event that's taken place in Kirtland, Ohio, with the dissenters.
Corroborated or supported by a second person claiming that he heard the same.
Yeah, so Burnett's not being, he's not misrepresenting Harris. He's reporting Harris probably pretty accurately, and Warren Parrish substantiated that.
Right, because I know apologists would say, well, it's like a second-hand statement, and there's loads other either first-hand or second-hand statements from, especially the 3 witnesses that make it very clear they really did see the angel and the plates. And we can talk about those quotes later. But you think that's a credible statement because it was written by both Stephen Burnett and Warren Parr?
At least it's reporting Harris accurately.
Yeah.
Okay. So Harris is making this statement. So that they would be secondhand, and then Harris is reporting his statement of he's not like quoting anybody. He's just saying this is what happened with the 8 witnesses because he has personal information. He knows these people. He's hung around them. Yeah. So he isn't like making it up. But so historians aren't shy about using secondhand testimony. They're not lawyers. It's not a trial. They have more sources and they use multiple testimony. Hearsay type testimony is not permissible in law because they have a whole separate civil rights and all that kind of stuff, to defend, to protect people. Okay, even the guilty.
Yeah.
Okay, even the guilty. So it's just they have different rules of evidence, and historians go about it in a completely different way. No one's going to be, go to jail if we're wrong. But so you try to make the best statement, and it's not, no one has any perfect evidence. Okay.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is who has the most warrant for their position or interpretation that they take. Who has the most evidence, the more credible evidence of the competing interpretations out there that are available. Yeah. Which one is the strongest?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I started. I mean, I would say to people like Milton Bachman on the First Vision, I would just say, well, the stronger argument is this, And so that's how I went about trying to build your narrative, what is the strongest, what is the most likely. You don't just discount stuff. Oh, that's hearsay, out. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
And there's a quote as well by John Whitmer. A lot of critics quote this of, he says that he held the plates. You could probably know who quoted this, and he saw them, by a supernatural power,
Yeah, I will get to
indicating
that.
that maybe it was some sort of a vision, not him literally seeing the plates. Now, when I read through Richard Lloyd Anderson's his sort of
Apologetic.
article, yeah, his apologetic. I was trying to think of the word article, or I
Yeah.
think it was a conference he did on it. He said something along the lines of, was it Theodore Turley? Was he the one that interviewed
Yes.
him? So he says
Yes.
that I think he says that he got confused because when he was interviewing John, he was saying to John Whitmer about seeing the angel and the plates, confusing John with being one of the three witnesses. And I think he says that he believes that he may have gotten things wrong about John Whitmer. So then maybe he got it wrong when he talked about a supernatural power. And then he also made the argument of there's so many other statements from the eight witnesses that talk about them seeing and holding and hefting the plates. And he's saying that critics, you're focusing on just one that says by a supernatural power by a guy, Theodore Turley,
Yeah.
who's maybe not the most reliable. I did write down one that I found as well from John Whitmer. It's from the
Mm-hmm.
1878 Deseret News interview. If you're familiar with that one, I'm sure you are. It's a statement, and he's asked, did he see the plates uncovered, or were they
Yeah.
covered in a cloth? And John Whitmer says no, like they weren't covered in a cloth. He saw the plates, turned the leaves, saw the engravings upon them. So
Yeah.
should that quote be taken into account? Because it seems to me whenever I read that, John Whitmer is saying no, they weren't covered in a cloth, so it wasn't like some visionary, but he actually
Yeah.
did hold and see them. And is it possible that Theodore Turley's statement could be incorrect, or maybe he just got things wrong? I think that's the argument apologists make with regards to the
Yeah.
witnesses. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
No, the one you just quoted out of the Deseret News is the Wilhelm Poulson.
Okay, right. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because he makes it explicit. And that's why apologists like to quote that one. And it's
Right,
a
right.
very problematic source.
Oh, okay,
Um,
got you.
so
That's
and
good. I didn't twig onto that. Okay.
The Theodore Turley, it comes from Theodore Turley's memorandum, which was collected in association with compiling sources for the history of the church. And Theodore Turley, the statement that John Whitmer gives, that's the reason why he's questioning John Whitmer. He knows John Whitmer is one of the eight witnesses. He knows who is who are the three witnesses. I mean, it's right in his Book of Mormon. But the reason why he's questioning John Whitmer is because of what's going on in Kirtland. It's also related. It's not a isolated event. Stephen Burnett sends the letter about what Harris said in public to Missouri, to Johnson, former apostle.
Was it Luke? Was it? No.
Luke, no,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm trying. Okay, oops, I got the wrong thing. Hold on a second.
You're okay.
So it's Stephen Burnett to Stephen Burnett. Maybe it is. John Johnson? No, not John Johnson.
Luke was the first name that
Oh,
popped
here
into
it
my
is.
head.
Lyman.
Oh, Lyman.
Lyman.
Okay.
Yeah. 15th of April, 1838. He wrote what Harris had been saying, sent it to Lyman E. Johnson in Missouri, and that was rumored around about what Harris and others were saying in Kirtland, Ohio, about the 8 witnesses, which caused Turley to question John, saying, "Do you deny your testimony?" You
Mm-hmm.
know, and then so John says, see if I can find that quote now.
I think I might have that in here. Is that the one where he says, "I know I say I handled those plates. There was fine engravings of both
Yes, that's
sides.
it.
I handled them." And he described how they were hung and they were shown to me by a supernatural power. And you argue in that video, if it was a natural viewing of the plates, why would it be by a supernatural power? It sounds
Yeah.
like a vision sort
So
of
more
thing.
or less, he's confirming Harris.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it fits in with Harris's thing. It's not an isolated, a goof up.
Right.
Turley didn't want that answer. Okay, he wanted a different answer. He wanted to
Am I right in thinking Turley, he was
deny
in
what
the
Harris
church?
was saying.
He was a member in the church, Theodore Turley? I actually think,
Yes,
yeah.
he was uh, an agent of at the time when they were trying to vacate Missouri, actually.
Hmm.
So yeah, he was always a member in good standing. And but Lyman Johnson was wavering himself, and at the time. So let's go back to what was it that the Stephen Burnett's reporting, and that is Harris. He says that the 8 witnesses hesitated, and that they saw them by supernatural power, or not supernatural. They saw them with the spiritual eye, not with the natural eye. No one has seen the plates with the natural eye. He says, well, how did they see it then? And Harris gives us the answer. The implication is that the 8 witnesses must have seen them like how he saw them before his vision of the angel and the plates.
Mm-hmm.
And so Harris says, he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, neither Oliver Cowdery nor David Whitmer. And also that the 8 witnesses never saw them with, this is
Stephen Burnett, isn't it? 1830.
This is Stephen Burnett.
Yeah.
1838. Okay. They never saw them with their natural eyes and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it. Upon hearing Harris's statement, Burnett said the last pedestal gave way, and he concluded, if the witnesses whose names are attached to the Book of Mormon never saw the plates with their natural eyes, as Harris admits, then there can be nothing brought to prove that any such thing ever existed. Then, so I added the phrase natural eyes, because it says they never saw them with their eyes. If you just left it like that, it doesn't make any sense. So, because they saw them, but
right.
The implication.
I have in here with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination. Is that part of the quote as well? So he's implying that it was either a vision or they imagined the plates according to this quote.
Yeah. Then Harris was questioned about this on a separate occasion after he made that public statement, and he says he according to Burnett, Harris said he was sorry for any man who rejected the Book of Mormon, for he knew it was true. He said that he had hefted the plates repeatedly in a box, and at other times with only a tablecloth or handkerchief over them, but he never saw them, only as he saw a city through a mountain. Through the cloth, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
with the
Right.
eye of faith. Okay, so he says he never should have told the testimony of the 8 witnesses was false if it had not been picked out of him, but
Yeah.
should have let it pass as it was. So, because he was a believer and he was reluctant to supply anything that these other guys would use as an excuse to not believe it.
Okay.
And so he says he should have never said anything to, he probably regretted it.
Okay.
And then there's another episode with so I, because there's so little detail about how the witnesses saw the plates, my reconstruction is, how do we resolve handling them and seeing them if they only saw them through supernatural power or the eye of faith? And so I think Harris provides us a model from that time period of how he saw them with the eye of faith when they were covered in, they were in a box or covered with a cloth.
Okay, I want to make 2 comments or
Yeah.
sort of like questions / like responses. So with the 8 witnesses, apologists say, well, there's also quotes from people like Hiram Smith, Samuel Smith, who talk about like seeing and holding the plate, and they would almost say that they support the position that they really did see them, see and hold the plate in a natural way. I think I've got a quote from Hiram where he says, let me see what the exact quote is. Or no, I think this is William Smith. He says that they not only saw with their eyes, but handle with their hands the record, nor has either or any of these witnesses ever, to my knowledge, counteracted the testimonies given above concerning the real existence of these Mormon tablets. I think you referenced in your video, Hiram says something along the lines of, well, I have 2 eyes and 2 hands, something like that. So they make it seem like, oh no, they really did see them in a natural way. So apologists then
Well, it
kind of go back.
sounds natural.
Sounds natural, yeah.
Because that's the deal. So if they saw them the way that I have reconstructed it, handled them while covered, and saw them like Harris did, they could say, I saw them and I handled them. And you would be reading into it less than what happened. It's like you would think, oh yeah, I saw them. As if spiritual sight is less than normal sight to somebody that believes in spiritual sight. They're not going to say, oh, I saw them, but I only saw them spiritually. They're not going to do that. They're going to say, I saw them.
Yeah.
And
I think there's that famous quote from David Whitmer. I know I have it in here, but he pretty much makes a statement, roughly like, of course we were in the spirit when we saw the angel in the place, like no man can behold an angel without being sort of in the spirit, but we were in the body also, and it was as natural as anything is around us. So apologists would say, well, David Whitmer's sort of answering the argument of spiritual eyes. He's saying, kind of like what you said about Richard Lloyd Anderson, it was a natural, supernatural vision, of the angel. Like, do you think that should be taken into account, David Whitmer's statement of it being kind of natural as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so David Whitmer saying, of course we saw the plates with our eyes, but they were prepared for that sight.
Yeah.
So when people talk about, oh, I saw them with my spiritual eyes, they're not saying I have 2 eyes. And that's Hiram's response, is kind of sarcastic. It's kind of evasive.
You thought it was a bit of a dodge?
Yes. So when Hiram came down to near where I live, near Columbus, Ohio, he was visiting some members down in central Ohio, and they actually had heard they had actually heard about these statements by Harris, I guess, and what the dissidents, the dissenters, were discussing about the testimony of 8 witnesses. And so they took an opportunity to question Harris, what they were saying up there in Kirtland, Ohio. In Sunbury, Ohio is where he was, right near here in Sunbury, Ohio, in April or May 1838. Okay, so this is all happening. This isn't just isolated, misunderstood quotes, right? This is an actual thing that's taking place, and people are questioning the witnesses because of it, you know. And the witnesses really aren't denying what Harris is saying. Okay, John confirmed it more or less. Okay, so Hiram has a chance here, and he says, he reportedly said he had but 2 hands and 2 eyes. He said that he had seen the plates with his eyes and handled them with his hands. So that is, he also said some strange thing about the breastplate being pure gold. But so I equate this with what David Whitmer said in 1886. I have been asked if I saw those things with our natural eyes. Of course, they were our natural eyes. There is no doubt that our eyes were prepared for the sight, but they were our natural eyes nonetheless.
Yeah.
So neither Whitmer nor Hiram were denying the visionary nature of the experience, only quibbling about or equivocating about the terminology Harris used and making a distinction with no real difference.
Oh, well, whenever you read the quote from Hiram, to me, it's so he said, "I've 2 eyes, 2 hands," and he said, I saw them and held them. At face value, to me, it almost does seem kind of natural. Like he doesn't mention anything visionary, like he doesn't mention spiritual eyes.
He's not denying vision with spiritual eyes.
Is that the question he's being asked?
He's being asked about what is going on with the Kirtland Dissenters. I don't have the whole quote right here. I'm just reading from my article, actually. So he was questioned about I wish I had the whole quote, but
Okay.
Anyway, so he's being questioned about it, and this is his response: is, so if he says I have but 2 hands and 2 eyes, somebody's brought up the spiritual eye thing,
right? Okay.
What would produce this response from Hiram? Oh, I only have 2 eyes. I don't have like a set of spiritual eyes and a set of physical eyes. I saw them with my physical eyes. Is not denying seeing them in a visionary way.
Okay.
And I find that for him to go there is a bit evasive. And saying, it's like why I quoted David Whitmer. He says they were, of course, it was our natural eyes.
Well, the 3 witnesses claimed it
but
was
they
a
were,
vision, didn't they?
But they were prepared, meaning, he did see them with the spiritual eyes. The terminology that Harris was using. So there's no denial. So when you get to witnesses making statements and you quote them saying, no, we saw them, it was just as natural as anything, and we saw them with our eyes, of course, they're not denying the visionary nature of it. So
that's the whole question, isn't it? Obviously, I don't know, I've never had a vision, but is a vision, is it hallucinatory, like is it really there, or is it a physical
hallucination?
Appearance? Yeah, I suppose that's sort of the argument. But I think opponents would say that the term spiritualize, eye of faith, those things are scriptural. I believe Moses in the Book of Moses talks about like beholding God, seeing like the glory of God, but not his natural eyes would have like withered away, but his spiritual eyes were able to see God because his glory came upon him and he was transfigured. sort of like linking to what David Whitmer said, like you have to be spiritually
Exactly.
prepared in
Yeah, where
order.
do you think they got this? It's like Harris didn't make up spiritual eyes. I mean, it's in D&C 17. They were promised to see the plates with their spiritual eyes. And the Moses thing is perfect example. I did not see them in the natural man. I saw them, in the spirit. The eyes of my faith, with the eyes of faith.
To talk about it in D&C 17, the eyes of faith, I think it uses that language.
The eye of faith.
Yeah.
And it does, if you read the D&C 17 closely, we don't have an original, what it originally said. It's been altered in its published form when it was published in the Book of Commandments, because it mentions Urim and Thummim. And in 1829, nobody was talking about Urim and Thummim. But it does say that they shall see the plates with their spiritual eyes, but they shall testify that they had seen them just as Joseph Smith had seen them, which is more natural.
Right. Yeah.
So the visionary or hallucinatory aspects is that a person that has a vision without trying to solve the metaphysical question of, is it real? The witnesses knew, the three witnesses knew that what they were experiencing wasn't normal.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the angel was. Some people have like hallucinations and they can't tell reality from the hallucination. They think what they're seeing is real. Say they see a person walking through the room or some sort of thing like that, and it's nobody else can see it. That's a delusion. That's somebody, maybe has some kind of mental disorder that can't tell reality from what their mind is producing. And it's real, like the person seems like they're there for real. Well, the witnesses weren't like that. The witnesses knew it was a special sight. It was different than normal sight.
Yeah, and Grant Palmer talks a lot about that, like second sight, seeing with spiritual eyes, like the eyes of your understanding. I think that's D&C 76, isn't it? Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith seeing like the visions of glory. And I think you talk about that in your video as well, about not seeing with their natural eyes, but spiritual eyes. But then apologists will probably go back to that David Whitmer quote where he makes it seem like, oh, it's both bodily and spiritual combined. I think that would be the way they would say it was like a natural, supernatural experience. Isn't there's a quote I think from Oliver Cowdery where isn't he asked, I might see if I can read it. I know I've got it on here. Where he says something like, oh yeah, it was a clear, open, beautiful day, far from any inhabitants, in a remote field. At the time we saw the record of which it hath been spoken. Braun lay before us by an angel arrayed in glorious light, who ascended and descended out of the midst of heaven. If this is human, juggling, judge ye. Because I think he was being questioned, like, a trick or like conjured up.
What was that quote from now?
Oh, I don't have the citation. I got it from Fair Mormon. He was being interviewed. It was at 1829 letter. I can get the citation, but I don't have it printed.
I don't think that one's in my document collection even.
Oh no.
No, because I think it's a fairly new source from Oliver Cowdery, because we don't have very many statements from Oliver Cowdery actually to compare, except this one, and I can't remember what I determined about this source, but I'll have to look it up. Yeah, I remember reading it, and it's somewhere, but I can't remember the details of it, where it's from.
Yeah. So he almost makes
Uh,
it like they're in the woods, everything was natural, and then the angel just sort of came down and appeared, and he's like, if this is juggling or trickery or you judge. So he kind of makes it seem like it wasn't just a hallucinatory vision. At least that's maybe how I read that quote. What do you think about that?
well, how would they know? Um, that's one of the things about hallucinations and visions is there's no way to tell the difference.
Mm.
And for me to resolve whether it was a hallucination or a real vision would be if the Book of Mormon's history.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So if the Book of Mormon's history, then it's possible that a Nephite came and showed them the plates and all that. But if the Book of Mormon's not history, there were no Nephites really. They didn't make any gold plates. Then it's a hallucination.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. That's the big question. If
So
it's not
now you're
historical.
back. You're
Yeah.
back to trying to determine whether the Book of Mormon's history or not.
Yeah. Okay.
So, so that's why I think this kind of testimony is not all that great.
Mm.
It doesn't really resolve anything. Now, the difference between the natural supernatural vision that Anderson was describing, that the angel was just there, like what Cowdery just said,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we know that so David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery supposedly saw it together,
Yes.
and Harris was separate. And David Whitmer made a comment once. He didn't think that Harris saw everything that they saw. Abner Cole reported that Harris's description of the plates was different than David Whitmer's description of the plates. And so I like the testimony of James Henry Moyle. And James Henry Moyle is an 1885 interview with David Whitmer. And he's an interesting reporter because he had just graduated law school, and he was questioning Whitmer, and he wanted to know the specific question that we're asking, actually.
Mm.
So sometimes testimonies are only good as the person interviewing, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Are they asking the right question? Or are they going, is your testimony in the Book of Mormon true? Yes, it's true. I saw them and I handled them. That's not going to be very helpful,
Yeah.
you know. So the subjective aspects of Whitmer's experience were brought out in an 1885 interview conducted by James Henry Moyle, who noted in his diary, Mr. D. Whitmer Sr. did not handle the plates, only saw them. Says he did see them and the angel and heard him speak, but that it was indescribable, that it was through the power of God. He then spoke of Paul hearing and seeing Christ, but his associates did not, because it was only seen in the spirit. Then Moyle asked a question that attempted to further ascertain if the angel's appearance was an objective or inward experience. I
Mm.
asked, he says, I asked if the atmosphere about them was normal. I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, that's the kind of psychic investigators, that's the kind of question psychic investigators want to know. So, in other words, did the angel appear in the natural world in a normal surroundings, as Anderson has suggested and the printed testimony implied? Or did he appear as one would expect of a vision surrounded by heavenly glory, like a hologram projected onto the natural world? Whitmer said, it was indescribable, but this is quoting Moyle. Whitmer said, it was indescribable, but the light was bright and clear, yet apparently a different kind of light, something like a soft haze. Moyle, a Mormon and recent law school graduate, noted his disappointment in his diary. This is him speaking again. I
Mhm.
was not fully satisfied with the explanation. It was more spiritual than I anticipated.
Mm.
So to me, the quality of this interview is much better than a lot of other ones, especially by non-Mormons who don't even really know what is going on. Okay, so Moyle's testimony is that usually in a psychic investigation, if something appears and the light is emanating and especially obscures the other surroundings, it overlays it. You know what I'm saying? Like, in the normal atmosphere, the woods disappear. You know, or even the light coming from the person would be part of the hallucination and would interfere with the normal atmosphere.
Mhm.
It's being overlaid onto it. So instead of just a being, we're added to the environment and the environment stays the same. And that's usually what psychic investigators ask, that kind of question to determine what kind of sight it was.
And you're saying, according to Henry Moyle, he thinks, and you would think it sounds more like a hallucinatory experience
Well,
or a
no,
vision.
it wasn't it was not a supernatural experience. It was a supernatural experience, whether it was, without trying to answer the metaphysical question of,
Yeah.
was it real? you know,
Yeah. See, that's the thing
um,
going on in my
we're
mind,
just,
because when you look at in the Bible, when say like an angel appears to
uh-huh.
somebody, or we talked about God in the Book of Moses, or even take Joseph Smith's first vision, if you're a believer, you would view that as it's a vision, so maybe others couldn't see it, and there's like brilliant light and such. But is it still, like, yeah, like you say, metaphysical? Is it real, or is it just a vision in their mind? And that's sort of like the
No,
question.
there's no way to tell,
Yeah, yeah, I think.
even for them, even for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's why I could say that you then have to determine whether the Book of Mormon's history, as to if this were a real or actual supernatural appearance of a Nephite.
Hmm. No, I'll come back to that. We skipped over a part because you talk about this in your videos.
Huh?
You talk about how you think the witnesses were kind of susceptible or prepared for a visionary experience, because you talked
Right.
about how they previously had spiritual experiences. I know Jeremy Ronald, he talks about in his CS letter that the witnesses aren't super credible because they hold this sort of magical worldview. They're more susceptible to like visionary experiences in, early 19th century America. A lot of people are claiming visions of things compared to our day, so they're maybe not as reliable. First of all, do you think that's a fair criticism made by critics? Like, we should maybe dismiss them because that was just their visionary mindset? And then the next question is,
Yeah.
for you to explain like how their spiritual experiences beforehand, why you think they were sort of prepared for a visionary slash hallucination experience. Because I know you wouldn't say, because apologists would say, oh, well, these were honest men, upright in the community. Oliver Cowdery was a lawyer and a school teacher. David Whitmer, I think, was on the city council. Was he mayor for a time? I know
Uh-huh.
Martin Harris, they say, he was a bit of a religious nut or fanatic. Maybe he jumped around a bit, but even he was respected as honest and a farmer. I guess touch on, like, do you think their magical worldview, or maybe more visionary mindset, does that make them, like, should you be more skeptical or sort of dismiss them more easily, as some critics say? And then the second point, talk a little about their spiritual experiences that you think might have prepared
Yeah.
them for it.
So in that question, and the implication with Richard Anderson's approach and Dan Peterson's new movie, well, I haven't seen the movie. I've only
The
seen
Witnesses, isn't it?
yeah, the witnesses
Oh,
excerpts from it.
I'll have to go see it.
The implication is that either people that are like have some kind of mental illness, or maybe they're stupid people, or maybe they're from the uh uncredible type persons. Only those kind of people can see hallucinations. you know
use that as a
um
straw man. Like that's not a
well,
fair.
hallucinations, anybody, it doesn't it doesn't matter how smart you are, or um how maybe uneducated you might be, or uh whether you're a liar or a truthful person. None of that matters whether you can see an hallucination or not. um it's kind of certain percentage of a population even now is what we would call schizotypal personality, which is kind of a lower grade schizophrenia kind of a thing, capable of seeing hallucinations. And a lot of hallucinations are triggered by stress. And they used to be a lot more prevalent in previous ages. A lot of researchers, Let's see. One book I found pretty handy would be this one, The Varieties of Anomalous Experience. And there's several articles in there by these researchers, and it's clinically written, a lot of it by professional psychologists that talk about how visual hallucinations have declined over time, across the board. Okay, so religious or non-religious people. So you want to know if Joseph Smith could have chosen people that were capable of being highly suggestible personalities, that he could put suggestions into their minds, and they were very willing to do it. Could that situation arise? Is it possible to, as much as you can, assess the individuals Joe Smith was working with? Whether would they be capable of receiving suggestion and seeing hallucination? And not that I can't say it was, like I keep repeating here, that
Yeah, I think
I can't say it
the
was a hallucination, but you want to be able to
can't
see.
discount that it was. I think that was the argument you're making in your video. You're not saying it definitely was, but
No,
then the apologists should take it into consideration, the possibility or probability that it might have
yeah,
been. You shouldn't
maybe
just
we can
dismiss.
move it towards the probability into the possibility spectrum. you
Mhm.
know um but so a lot of the movie that Peterson has and Anderson's approach were to uh, deny that the witnesses had been liars, that they were
Yes,
in on the deception. But that's never been my position, to say, oh, they all lied, it's a big conspiracy.
because they're all true to their testimonies, even after
Yeah,
leaving the church. They never recanted their testimony, and even they reaffirmed it, at least in
yeah,
the case of the three, to the until the day they died. So that's not the argument you're making. You believe that
no.
if they were sincere, um, but maybe deluded, or if they had a hallucination, they sincerely believed it was a real
Yeah,
vision.
well, these were religious people, and religious people have had visions and throughout
Yeah, no doubt.
centuries, endless time. It's part of the human brain anatomy.
Yeah.
The ability to hallucinate can't be denied, that humans have the ability to do that,
Hmm.
and they do have the ability. But were these guys, did they possess that ability, is the question.
Yeah.
Okay. And um are we safe when there's multiple hallucinators? So the story of Lourdes. Let's say there's three children, and they see the Virgin Mary. There's people that it's been
Shakers?
documented. The Shakers, they have like similar witnesses. Were they all liars? I mean, or did they see? And did they see the same angel in the same role of this sacred role and all that stuff? And so there has been studies of group hallucination. And I didn't invent the idea. There's been studies of how that occurs and how in a group they're highly suggestible people in a highly suggestible situation, and they actually trigger each other, in saying what they see. They're tainting each other, in a way that I see this or I see that, and that's why I refer to that Sigrid and Joseph Smith vision of the three heavens, that they say that they saw with the eye of their understandings. Okay. The people that were in the room when they were having that vision in 1832 was reported, Father Dibble reported that Joseph Smith would say, I see this, and Rigdon would say, I see this, and they were going back and forth seeing in this vision. And then afterwards they write it all down they don't write 1/100th of what they saw, they said, but they have to they make a statement that represents the vision. It's not the vision itself. It's just an account and a representation of what they experienced. And that way, it seems like a unified version. They saw the same thing. It appears, but it only appears in the written text. What they saw was a lot different than that text, and whoever's controlling the text, probably Joseph Smith, is making it a unified document. And the same thing with the 3 and 8 witnesses.
So you're sort of making the argument, if I'm understanding, that even though they're claiming to see the angel and the plates sort of in a generic way, you're saying that how do we know and how do they know that they're seeing the exact same thing, having the exact same vision or experience?
Yeah. And so were previous experiences with second sight or the eye, seeing with the eye of faith and things like that, is one of the indicators of suggestibility. So when there's people that I'm talking about clinical hallucination now, or clinical hypnosis, not stage hypnosis, not like Brian Hales represented with the pocket watch, a pendulum like pocket watch, hypnotizing you. That has nothing to do with reality.
Apologists kind of make it seem like this, possible theory you have of Joseph Smith being either skilled in hypnosis and hypnotizing the witnesses into seeing a vision of the angel in the gold plate. That's quite hard to believe. Like, that almost sounds like there's no evidence to support that.
Right.
Maybe you feel like that's bit of a maybe do you feel like that's a bit of a straw man?
It's a but it's a character.
Seems as hard to believe as the angel in the gold plate actually appearing that he hypnotized them and they all have the same hallucination.
No. I talk about hypnosis, and some people, hypnosis or mesmerism didn't come to the United States until the 1840s. What do people have been doing this for thousands of years, getting into trance states through various methods. Mesmerism was just kind of a social way of doing it in that time. Okay. But suggestion had been performed at the revivals all during Joseph Smith's time, where especially the falling power would be, that they would suggest that the audience was going to lose power. And you could see it with some revival things like with Henny Youngman or Henny Lynn, what's the guy's name? Henny Youngman? Henny Lynn, whatever. He's an evangelical that goes around and pretends like he's going to touch you on the forehead, and then you fall back and you lose power.
So would you say
And
when they're worked up into like a religious fervor or state, they're more susceptible to hypnosis and maybe
yeah,
even a hallucination,
suggestion,
suggestion, right?
the power of suggestion. And so in clinical psychology, they have actual tests to test people to see where they are on a spectrum of hypnotizability, to see if you're a good candidate and how deep you will go and all sorts of things. So it's real. It's not, the thing you see on the stage is faked for the most part. It's not real. It's people
Like
playing
performance.
for the most part. Yeah, for the most part, it's people playing along. Okay, and but in a clinical setting, it's entirely different, and it and the hypnotist isn't the one doing it. He doesn't have any power to hypnotize you. You're doing it to yourself. Okay, he's just providing the suggestion and leading you along. He's the guide leading into deeper and deeper states. And religious shaman, we'll call him shaman, for thousands of years have inducted people into this trance state the same way. Fasting, prayer, they voluntarily want to get into the state. There's probably 50 different ways. This book right here, Hallucinations in Clinical Psychiatry, excuse me, lists about 50 ways to induce hallucination or a hypnotic state.
And you would say very religious people are quite susceptible?
Yeah. Well, one of the ways is repetitious words, chants, or repetitious motions, like the swirling dervisher people that get into a trance state through their twirling. It's a repetition of ritual. Ritual is a good way to induce, but you can get into hallucinatory states through fatigue, extreme fatigue, through sleep deprivation, through fasting was one. Low blood sugar will cause hallucination, and the Catholics have done it for centuries, induced hallucination. Some people induce the trance state through self-flagellation. It gets pretty bizarre, but
I reckon probably maybe drinking as well, or drugs would.
Well, usually alcohol doesn't induce hallucinations.
Okay.
But maybe makes you more relaxed and susceptible to suggestion if you already have the ability probably to do it. And remember, people are on this spectrum. And some people have auditory hallucinations, some have visual hallucinations, some people have tactile hallucinations. So it's a very huge subject. It's not something you stage
right. Yeah.
with a pocket watch.
Yeah.
That's people that do not understand, and I think should have known better.
And I think, is it Von Brody who believes Joseph Smith was unconsciously doing it? He wasn't an unconscious hypnotist, if he was, so to speak. But okay, I think
I think he pretty well discovered it, the ability. When he suggested treasure spirits were around, or treasures moved away, and saw people and the treasure seekers. So one testimony talks about the treasure digger seeing some kind of not an angel, but some tall personage standing on someone's barn. A group of them saw money diggers saw it, and they could hear the ticks of the a kettle of pocket watches. And so there's one story I read out of Rochester money diggers. They actually heard the grumbling of the treasure moving away.
Wow.
And they would, in the darkness, they would see spirits and headless ghosts and things like that. But they're, humans seeing things is not that unusual. Now,
and
you're
that's
going to have
something as a believer, as an apologist, I would have to, concede and acknowledge that. Like, I went through a phase where I listened to lots in my faith crisis, listening to loads of either near-death experiences or people claiming visions. I've listened to loads of people claiming to see, heaven, Jesus, angels, demons, hell, aliens. I even watched a show on Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries, and multiple witnesses. I think there's about 10 or 15 all claim to see like a UFO and aliens, and I remember thinking,
UFO.
like there's so many of them claiming it, and it's like, what do I think about that? So I guess you're right that although the more witnesses adds credibility to something, it's not just unique to the Book of Mormon witnesses, that there's been other people, even more than one person, claiming supernatural visionary experiences. And that's something that obviously you have to acknowledge as a believer. It's not just exclusive to the witnesses. Now, you talk about in your video that the three witnesses had spiritual experiences prior to the vision, and you think that made them more susceptible. That was my understanding.
So when they want to see where you are on the spectrum of hypnotizability, that's one of the questions. Is, do you have this? Have you had the experiences, paranormal experiences in your life? And there's several questions that they'll ask, and you tick them off, and to see where you are. And so one of them is these prior experiences, if they're trying to figure out whether they can hypnotize you or not, and how deep you will probably go. And so another one would be a thing called automaticity, which is automatic movement. Now, people that use a rod like Cowdery, if it felt like it moved itself and he didn't move it, that's automaticity. Okay. Or some people, they'll ask a question and then a pendulum would start swinging. They swear they're not moving it. No, I'm holding it still. So, and the same thing with the rod. Yeah. The Ouija board as well. That taps into, I could never make the thing work, but it taps into, some people have this automaticity. They also found it with people that were doing, psychologists recent years, I should say, until they uncovered that it was automaticity. And it would be assisted guiding of autistic children who would spell out words, and they would say, oh, this autistic person, this person that normally can't communicate, even can communicate this way. Well, it would only work if the psychologists, who should have known better but didn't, had their hands on it too, and they swore they weren't moving it, and it seemed like the autistic children, were communicating. These were severe autistic children. And until somebody came along and showed them that it was automaticity, that's the unconscious movement of your hand, of not like the Ouija. It worked much like that Ouija board. So some people fell for it. They didn't understand what was going on, but they should have understood. But it went on for quite a while before somebody explained it to him, and it got them into a lot of trouble for a while. But anyway, if that would be for Cowdery, he would be highly suggestible. That would be one indication.
Yeah, because his work with the rising rod, and it talks about that in, was it DNC 8, about, you know, he's held in his hands and it's maybe moved at times, and yeah.
Yeah, it's told you many things. Well, so in Cowdery, before he even came to Joseph Smith, according to 1832 history, at the very end, says that the Lord had showed him the plates, you know, in a
Like a
dream.
dream? Did he have a dream of them?
Yeah,
Dream slash vision?
he had already seen the plates
Okay.
before he was even one of the witnesses. So I was never sure, except for that quote that you just gave, if that was the time that he saw them instead of at the time, you know, with David Whitmer. So, and David Whitmer, we know, had seen the messenger and on the road, and had seen before he went to have the vision with Smith and the other two. He said he was out plowing in the field and he saw the messenger who told him that I forget the exact words that the messenger told him in the field, but the messenger, the words that Whitmer heard in the field actually end up in the testimony of three witnesses. Whatever that the messenger said, testify
Like,
that.
blessed is he who keeps the commandments, something like
Yeah,
that.
that's it. That's it. He said in the interview that that's what he heard in the field before he went and became one of the three. So we have him actually seeing, having a vision before the vision. And Harris, of course, is well known, religious eccentric. And now there are other elements that influence what they would see. Experiences of the plates in the cloth, feeling the plates in the cloth, the rings, the, you know, what they were told by Joseph Smith. They had also seen, well, the angel looked like the man that David Whitmer had seen on the road, with a beard, and Joseph Smith Sr. is also reported to have seen a little old man with a beard, you know.
Didn't Mary Whitmer see him as well when she was
Yes, and
milking the cows?
so David Whitmer, in Joseph Smith saying that the angel was a little old man with a white beard, and then Joseph Smith Sr. said that that's what Joseph Smith said the angel looked like, and then David Whitmer saw the little old man with the white beard on the road. Then he brings Joseph and Oliver to the Whitmer farm, and he tells his mother that he saw the messenger as a little old man with a white beard with the plates in a knapsack on the road. And then when she saw the angel, that's what she saw, you know. So the suggestion, from my analysis, the suggestion is being passed on of what the three witnesses will see.
Right. So you see the Mary Whitmer experiences, maybe the power of suggestion filtering through, because an apologist or believer would see it as she had a supernatural visionary. Was it a visionary experience, or was it where she talked about more like just an old man showed her the plate?
No, it was a vision. It was a vision.
Yeah. So they would see it as, well, that was, you know, not connected to Joseph Smith. That almost strengthens the witnesses' claim of the vision and the gold plates, that it wasn't just the three witnesses, but it was Mary Whitmer as well. I think that would be their sort of take on it.
Right. They referred to her as the fourth witness.
Yeah.
So then there was so all three of them have these kinds of suggestion of what they're going to see. The D&C 7, the promise that they shall see the plates with the eye of faith, and they'll also see the Liahona and the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate. That also got them ready for what they will see. It was part of the suggestion. They also had seen the Anthon transcript, the characters, so they know what the characters will look like on the plates, which becomes an interesting thing when John Whitmer said that, as part of the 8 witnesses, that I think it's all Orson Pratt that reports this, though, that they had seen the plates, and they were writing on both sides, and that some kind of ink or black stain had been added so that it was easier to read the characters. So to me, that suggests that in seeing those transcribed characters on the paper in black ink is what influenced what they had seen in their vision.
Oh, okay.
That's why it was black, and that they tried to explain why the characters were black, and that's how their mind made sense of the black characters on gold plates.
Right.
That's how they explained it, which is a very common thing to do in memory. So that I would believe that would be part of the suggestion. And of course, you can go through the 8 witnesses and do the similar kind of thing.
Okay. That's grand. Let's see, I had a question in my mind and it's just slipped away. Well, I guess so when it comes to the 3 witnesses, so yeah, so you would see it, your construction or your interpretation of what happened was it was some sort of a hallucinatory experience, essentially, a vision maybe in their mind, that
yeah, I would be careful. Hallucination, vision, same thing. Whether it was had metaphysical reality to it is another question. It's totally separate. So
yeah.
You can't take somebody's vision and say it's not real.
Right. So you're not making a claim that it wasn't real? Is that what you're saying?
I can't even address whether it's real or not. It's
okay.
But it's a thing that we all know that humans experience those things.
Yeah. But would you tend to lean towards it not being real because you don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical? Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got you.
I mean, some people might argue that it's real experience, even if the Book of Mormon is not history. It would be a very uncomfortable kind of explanation. It wouldn't exactly sit very well. But
do you not think it's a little bit risky that Joseph Smith, if he's the author of the Book of Mormon, this is the question I had earlier that slipped out of my mind.
Yeah.
Do you not think it's a little bit risky or like very overconfident for him if he's the author to prophesy of the witnesses seeing the plates, kind of like promising that they will, and then them going, to the woods, and then they have that vision? Like, that's pretty amazing that he prophesied that if he's the author and it's not an inspired the word of God. That's pretty incredible that that happened, that they all saw it sort of as he prophesied or as the Book of Mormon promised. And I think apologists would probably go with that and be like, man, that was pretty incredible.
Wow. Yeah, well, it would be very hard for us to duplicate such a thing, even with this one person. But in the situation that he was in, there's a lot of things in history that are just not repeatable. But but as we have discussed, that it has happened in the past, group hallucinations, and we have established that shaman have led people to have various spiritual experiences in whatever their culture was and what they expected to see, and things were different. But we know that it has happened. It can happen. Exactly how Joseph Smith made it happen is fit his situation. I mean, if he weren't confident, it probably would not have happened. I mean, that's part of um, suggestion, is to be confident for it to happen.
And isn't there a quote by, is it Lucy Smith, that when they come home after seeing the angel in the plates, that Joseph is almost like he's really relieved, and
Yeah.
he says to Lucy, like, I can't remember the exact word, but he's really relieved, and it's like he doesn't have to bear this burden himself, and now other people know that I'm not just deceiving or lying to people about the plates. And whenever I read that quote, to me, he comes across like sincere, like almost like it's a relief off his
Mhm.
shoulders. Like, would you view Joseph as being, because you hold the pious fraud theory, so
Yeah.
is he sincerely relieved because it's like,
Yeah.
yes, I pulled off this
Uh-huh.
hallucination, or is he relieved because they really did see
Well,
the angel in the plates? Like, how do you view that quote? Because to me,
well,
he
he,
seems
yeah,
sincere whenever I read that.
yeah, he's sincere in being relieved. Um, he, he may have even believed God helped him do that. Okay. So that he got witnesses to substantiate what he believes God was helping him to dictate, and that he had been commanded to um, use deception to convert people. So, and when he converted people and convinced people, it gave him more and more confidence that God had commanded him to do this thing. So now, remember, Harris didn't have a vision. He struggled having a vision. So that at first, that was a failure.
Yeah.
And if Harris never came around to having the vision, if he did he really have a vision, or did he just want to be one of the witnesses so bad?
Well, didn't he
You
say in
know,
Drew Smith's history, like,
so
tis enough, mine eyes have beheld, when
yeah,
Joseph said he saw
right.
the angel in the plates again?
Mhm. So in some group situations, there's isn't just one thing that takes place the same for everybody. And there has been some discussion in the literature, not me, but that some people in some situations don't want to disappoint, or they want so badly to be part of it
Hmm.
that they do play along. That's what happens with stage hypnotism sometimes. They
Hmm.
so much want to be part of it. And they pick, and you try to find the people that will do this kind of, co-fraudulent kind of hypnotism on stage. But
Do you think Martin Harris? You wouldn't think, like, you think
I
Martin
mean,
Harris
I'm
was
not
just
saying
sincere
he
though?
did,
Okay, yeah, just saying it's
but
possible.
there's that
Hmm.
there that we can't totally exclude. But
Yeah.
uh there so say Harris failed and he never came around. Joseph Smith already had three witnesses, if he included himself, um, to the plates. Then he could have found someone else. And the more remarkable, or not remarkable, actually not remarkable, all sorts of other people started seeing it, like Mary Whitmer started seeing the plates and the angel, started having testimonies of the plates. He was attracting these charismatic or visionary type people. This is Bushman wrote that article on the visionary culture. There was
Hmm.
this kind of subculture of visionaries that didn't really fit in. But people at their revivals were having visions, they were going to heaven and seeing their name written in the book of life,
Yeah.
and they were revivals were having these kinds of experiences. Mormons aren't unique to this kind of thing. There's
Yeah,
all sorts
that's
of
true.
other ministers that were being converted to become ministers by having first visions of their own,
Yeah.
seeing Christ and things like that. So
That's one thing that was a surprise to me when I learned about whenever I was researching Joe Smith's first vision, is because I grew up, thinking that this was just a unique theophany, and then realizing that lots of other people in his time period had similar experiences of seeing the divine, God, Jesus, and it
yeah,
wasn't as uncommon as what we think, whether or not those other experiences were real or not.
well,
But
it is less common now.
yeah,
That,
yeah,
like I was mentioning, in these researchers talk about how over time visionary visual hallucinations have declined. And I think as I recall, that the auditory has rose in with more prominence. But
yeah,
so uh, Joseph Smith would have kept trying until he succeeded in getting 3. He didn't have to do anything with the 8. So if he took 8 out and only some of them saw it, there would be nothing to, you failed kind of a thing. But they did. They testified that they saw it. How they saw it is a matter of dispute, of course, right, that we have discussed already. But one way or another, he would have got his 3 witnesses. No, there's no doubt. I mean, he didn't have to succeed. There was no if Martin Harris failed, then you're a false prophet. There's none of that on the line. It just said 3. There shall be 3 special witnesses, and these guys wanted to be them. They requested Joseph Smith. They asked him if they could be the 3.
yeah. So in your view, they were highly suggestible for that reason.
Yeah, they were very willing and able and desirous to be those 3 witnesses.
Okay. Um, I want to read or talk about a quote. Since we're talking about hallucination, there's a quote from, I think, David Whitmer. You probably know it. I'm sure you're aware of it. Where I think he's asked in an interview. Yes, I think I have it. He was interviewed by Joseph Smith III in the presence of others, and he was sort of like asked, like, could it have been some mental disturbance or like a
Yeah,
hallucination? Kind of like what we're talking about. Like we're thinking, like maybe it was a hallucination, maybe it was, you know, in your mind or whatever. And he says, how well and distinctly I remember the manner in which Elder Whitmer rose, drew himself up to his full height, a little over 6 feet, and then said in a solemn and impressive tone, "No, sir, I was not under any hallucination, nor was I deceived. I saw with these eyes and heard with these ears. I know whereof I speak." So like we're discussing like the possibility, like, and me being somewhat open-minded and fair and objective, like I can look at, yeah, there's other instances in history of people claiming things, and you can't remove that possibility if it could have been perhaps a hallucination. Maybe they were suggested. But when you read that quote from David Whitmer, he seems so adamant and sure, like almost like offended at them
yeah,
accusing him of maybe being a hallucination. He's like, no, like it was no hallucination. He knows it was real to him, his experience with the angel and the plates. An
yeah,
apologist might say, why shouldn't we, should we really take that into account, or at least listen to what he's saying, that, him and Oliver Cowdery seem very sure that it wasn't a hallucination or juggling or trickery, but it was real. And should we really listen to what they're saying? What's your thought on like that quote in light of this?
well, how would you know the difference? What would you look for if it were hallucination? you
I
know
kind of knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
what would it be the difference?
So you're saying,
I
how
don't
could
know.
he tell the difference between a vision and a hallucination?
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, he saw it. He
Yeah,
really
yeah,
believed it. There's so many people that have hallucinations that swear that they're real and they see people, and but how would they know? How would they know
Mm,
what's the difference between a hallucination and a real vision?
yeah,
I mean,
that's
how
a
are
really
you
good
going to judge
question.
that? And that's the thing. I mean, our
There's an element
brains.
of faith, isn't it? Like the witnesses don't remove for believers. Like you might see them as strong evidence, but or you may think it's not as strong, but it still requires, do you believe their testimonies at the end of the day? It doesn't. There's still that element of faith.
Yeah, they're not lying,
No, I don't think they are.
and they're sincere. It seemed real. They knew it was a different sight though than
Mhm.
normal sight. I mean, it's an angel.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not. They're not confusing reality from this experience. They know this experience is extraordinary experience.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's one comment that Richard Anderson made in his book was usually people under hypnosis know that they're experiencing an hallucination, like
Hmm.
it's not normal sight. And so my response was, yeah, well, that's exactly what the witnesses said. It wasn't normal sight. So people who are being hypnotized know that it's not normal sight. And so people that experience visions for whatever reason, maybe they might fast a long time, maybe they might do there's chemical hallucinations and chemically induced hallucinations that still believe that they're real, even though they're using peyote or whatever. Some shaman actually think that it's just an aid to having super real experiences, more real than real, because it's different than reality.
Mm.
It's so different than reality, it must be super reality of some form, that's closer to reality that we don't experience, therefore it's more real than real. So people can interpret, it's how the people interpret their experiences, and you can reinterpret spiritual experiences over time, because these experiences, like any other experience that you experience in life, are subject to reinterpretation with further knowledge, experience.
Mm.
So they're not set in stone either. So
Okay.
whatever spiritual experiences you have can be reanalyzed later.
I don't think it's necessarily wrong to be skeptical as well. Like one thing I think apologists can kind of attack critics for being super skeptical, but I remember like my wife's roommates before we got married, they were all claiming there was a ghost in their apartment, and there was I think six of them. My wife never claimed to see anything, but one of them claimed to seeing the ghost. A few of them claimed to like weird things happening and like hearing the ghost and like things like that. And like I don't think any of them were lying, if that makes sense. Like they seemed like good, honest people, but I was very skeptical whenever they were telling me about it. I was like, I don't know if I believe them. I was like, what? Like I've never seen a ghost, even though I'm like a believer. There's still part of me that's kind of skeptical of it. Like,
Yeah,
like I don't know. And then yeah, like we talked about, there are people in history who have claimed to see lots of things, and how do you know what they've seen or not? So there is, I can understand an element of skepticism towards the witnesses, but do you think for people who outright dismiss the witnesses, especially when you have a lot of the primary statements where they make it sound really matter of fact, they saw the
yeah.
angel, they saw the plates, do you think critics should maybe be a little bit more open-minded or not be so quick to just discount them? Like, do you think that it should be taken into consideration at least and not just brushed off as a hallucination or just in their mind or spiritualized, when you take into account maybe other quotes where they make it sound very literal and very much they saw it, like that doesn't necessarily prove or mean that it's true and that Joe Smith is a
Right.
prophet. But do you think it should be taken into consideration as you're, examining this topic?
Well, to me, like visionary and religious experience is really is an individual,
Subjective?
of how
Mm.
they want to take it, because there's nothing that's going to, in itself, tell you anything about reality. It's a subjective experience in the person. They make it, whether they decide whether it's real or not, because it happened to them.
Yeah.
Do they take it as part of their knowledge experience and make decisions on their base life decisions on things like that? So to me, as evidence, it doesn't really, it's kind of a stalemate.
Mm. Okay, yeah.
it it doesn't tell you this way or that way.
Yeah.
Well, I do know, which makes the thing that makes me skeptical is that there's a sea of hallucinations that probably are not real. It's
Yeah.
we know the human mind does this, okay? And in this sea of hallucination, you're supposed to try to find the real ones, you know?
Mm. Yeah,
It's
and
not,
there could be an
it's an
element of
impossible task.
who are you to say that these ones are true, but these ones aren't? And
Right.
you're probably saying that there might be a bit of bias in choosing, oh yeah, we can believe these supernatural experiences, they're credible, but
Mhm.
these ones over here, despite maybe being multiple witnesses, I don't know about them. So yeah, you're right. Like you probably would see it as there should be the same sort of skepticism and open-mindedness and caution to both sides. So I kind of respect that position. I just have a couple of like final questions before we wrap up. These aren't personal in any ways. I have a lot of respect for you and would never try to attack you, but these are more from maybe
Yeah.
apologists,
Yeah.
pushing back a little bit.
Mhm.
So the first question is, so we talked about Occam's razor, how like sometimes like the simplest explanation is often the right one. And maybe when you apply Occam's razor to other areas of Mormon truth claims, like the Book of Abraham, we'll not get into that, but you might say, oh, maybe the simplest explanation rather than, maybe long scroll theory or catalyst theory is Joseph Smith just couldn't translate Egyptian and got it wrong. But if you apply Occam's razor just to the witnesses, an apologist might say it almost seems harder to believe that Joseph made tin plates, that he was able to, trick all the witnesses, with the gold plates and then induced hallucinations in them. Like that almost seems like in some people's mind, maybe believers' mind, like almost as hard to believe that he was able to pull off that sort of a con. Maybe con's the wrong word. Than what if it was really just an angel in the gold plates and they're all just telling the truth? Would you have a response to that?
Well, when you're using Occam's razor, which is a formula for judging which version of the same theory,
That's probably which is most likely, but it doesn't mean necessarily true. But it's probably
well, it's the one that has the least amount of assumptions. So
yes,
when
yeah,
you're trying to use Occam's razor to decide between the supernatural and the natural explanation, the natural, of course, is always going to win.
right, okay,
So I don't see Occam's razor, no matter how complicated, right? The natural explanation is, the supernatural requires far more assumptions, and so it's not really fair. Occam's razor is really used for scientific theory.
mm,
It's Occam's razor is for naturalist theories. That which version of the same theory do you accept? The one that requires the least elaboration and explanation.
mm, yeah,
So,
that's
but
right.
when you're trying to compare two different explanations, Occam's razor, and especially if one's supernatural and one's natural, it doesn't really work.
Okay, okay, that's grand. So one question, and this comes from an apologetic friend that you know they would say, Dan, I don't think you fully just outright dismiss the witnesses. I think you've actually shown you're a little bit more neutral. That's the vibe I'm getting. You're kind of like, I can't say it wasn't a real vision. But so
Yeah.
they would say that because of your naturalistic worldview and your assumption the Book of Mormon isn't historical. So I think the connection's going a wee bit. That you automatically dismiss or assume that they didn't have a real vision, that there wasn't a real angel, and it's because of that that you reinterpret or don't accept the testimony of those witnesses, and it comes more out of your naturalistic worldview. Well, there's no Nephites, there's no angels, so they couldn't have had that experience. What would be your response to that? And I think I know your response is going to be, well, you don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical, and we'll have to do another discussion on the Book of Mormon. But what would be your response to that?
Okay, to focus on bias is to focus on the arguer. Okay, and that's ad hominem. Because you're saying you're not going to consider my argument. You're just going to say I'm biased. That's why I ended up with my argument. And that's ad hominem. And it's disguised. A lot of people try to sneak it in that way, but it's so I think the Book of Mormon can be judged, the Book of Mormon's historicity. It's easier to judge that than it is to judge whether the witnesses had a real or hallucinatory experience. And that's why I go back to the actual physical evidence.
And you would see the witnesses' visionary experience should be judged in light of the historicity or the evidence supporting the historicity.
Well, it really doesn't go anywhere. I mean, a lot of believers think it's, evidence because it's a multiple situation. And that's why I've tried to describe that it's not as really solid as it seems on the surface of reading the written testimonies. It's very complex. It's very complex. It gets into subconscious or subjective experience and trying to tell whether it's a real supernatural experience. It's just not possible to answer those kind of questions as a historian.
Okay.
It just, you can't answer that. It's a dead end. That's why I think it's a kind of, you're barking at the wrong tree. You put your ladder on the wrong wall and you're trying to climb up that, and you should be over here trying to figure out whether the Book of Mormon's the actual historical document or not. And what is probably the truth about that. And we have more to work with, it's more, you can ask questions. You can ask questions of it and then test it.
So in your mind, that's the bigger question, is more, is the Book of Mormon historical?
Yeah.
Your ancient record, as opposed to, did the witnesses see what they saw, and that therefore would prove the Book of Mormon as a historical record? Now that makes sense. I've got another follow-up question, again from sort of an apologetic friend. This is maybe a little bit more personal, but so the question is, hypothetically, so this is a hypothetical, which as a historian you won't like, but it's more of a personal question, a hypothetical. If they say discovered an altar that said zarahemla on it, but say without the vowels in it, or another hypothetical, say you had a visionary experience of an angel, say the angel Moroni with the gold plates, either of those two hypotheticals, would that change your position on the experience of the 3 and the 8 witnesses? It's hypothetical, I know.
Okay. So yeah, that's like, if I had to experience, I had to have what I thought was spiritual experiences as a Mormon, but I came to reinterpret the meaning of those. So it's just as subjective for me as it is for them. you know.
Okay. So you would apply the same scrutiny
Yeah,
or
I've had
skepticism to yourself.
what
Yeah.
you would call spiritual experiences as a
Okay.
Mormon. You know, I thought I knew spiritually. I had a testimony just like anyone else, but as time went on, I had to reinterpret that experience. That's what I was talking about before. Was spiritual experiences are no different than real experiences in a way, and they're subject to reinterpretation. The events can happen to you in real life that you misinterpret, or you learn to interpret differently with more knowledge as you live life. And you look back and you reinterpret experiences to mean different things
Hmm.
when you're older. But same thing with spiritual experiences can be reinterpreted
Yeah.
because they're just experiences
Yeah.
in it for you inside internally. Everything happens internally anyway. But
But if you did see, say hypothetically, because I would agree with you, some of my personal spiritual experiences, I feel like I could maybe explain them away or reinterpret them as maybe
Mhm.
coincidence or elevation emotion, or some are maybe hard to deny. But if it was an angel that appeared with gold plates, I think that would be harder to deny. I suppose there's still that explanation. It could be a hallucination or something like that. But somebody might say like, oh, that would be harder to deny
Yeah.
if that's what you actually saw. But again, you said that you would apply the same scrutiny or skepticism.
Yeah, well, if it happened, the vision of this angel with plates happened the same way that I reconstructed it with, say, David Whitmer's and Henry Moyle explanation, I would probably have to not be so certain that it was real, and
You'd
I'd
have a bit
have
of
to,
epistemic humility, so to speak.
I'd have to say that humans have hallucinations,
Mm,
and I'm a human. And
right.
so if it were a totally different kind of experience than what Henry Moyle got out of David Whitmer, uh, I could imagine that there would be more certainty with a different kind of experience. But the experience that has been described, and as I reconstruct it, doesn't seem to be so certain as, or David Whitmer's certainty may not be so justified as he thinks it was.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
So, there's lots of people who have hallucinations that thought they were real at the time, that came around to, I would include myself maybe, but came around to believing that, well, I was just young, and I saw things that, that were suggested,
Mm,
and to me, and I saw things, and they weren't real. They were just my imagination,
mm,
and may have seemed real at the time because of the state of mind I had.
mm.
But
Okay.
um,
What about if they found a Book of Mormon
an altar
artifact,
zarahemla.
so to
Yeah.
speak? What would that?
Uh,
I know it's a
yes.
hypothetical, but
Yes, that would change my mind.
okay, okay, that's cool. So Dan Vogel is open-minded. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And even me, like I've been thinking to myself, like I always feel like if I were on a scale, I feel like part of me would be like maybe highly susceptible to like a vision, just because like I'm still a believer and I feel like it's something that I've wanted for a long time. Like I know it's wrong to seek after a sign, but there's been so many times I've wanted to have some sort of a revelatory dream, or like wanted to see it. There's even been times where I've really almost wanted it to happen after a really heartfelt prayer. And for me, I've been disappointed because it's never happened to me. And there's times where I feel like, ah, I don't know how I could like make it happen in my mind, like thinking it was real when it's not. But I don't know. That's just me. But there's times where I think like I've never had a hallucination, even though I've really wanted one, if that makes sense. Or I could like
Yeah.
visualize something, but I know it's not real, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Visual imagine, imagery. Like
Yeah,
the TNC 76, the eyes of our imagination,
yeah,
you know. And so that's what I mentioned, is that Joseph Smith guided them, saying that, the angels here, if you have faith, you will see him. He's holding the plates. He's turning the leaves.
So you think he was suggesting those things?
Sort of, maybe like
Maybe.
what he did with Sidney Rigdon,
Mm-hmm.
what I would call guided imagery, and how vivid it was depended on the person receiving the suggestion.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, you seek a greater witness, like Martin Harris, how he went down to Harmony and said, I need a greater witness, Joseph. I want a greater witness.
Yeah, yeah.
And Joseph said, well, follow my feet prints in the snow, and the plates will be there, and you'll see the plates. And he does, and he doesn't see the plates, and so it was his fault. But he didn't have enough faith, and sometime maybe you will, and then you'll see them. So he was seeking a greater witness just before Cowdery came to become his replacement. And so that's sort of like everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember on my mission having that wish, just give me the testimony, a stronger testimony, and I'll be the greatest, missionary there ever was. It never happened. But
and then you open the scriptures and you read about like an evil and adulterous generation seeketh the sign, and then you feel
that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You just brought that up, and then that reminds me that testimony of Jesus's resurrection has the same kind of problems.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. You need to apply the same scrutiny. If you're going to, scrutinize the witnesses of the gold plates, you can apply the same criticism. How are they any more credible as the witnesses of the resurrection? And again, I think it does sort of come down to faith in some ways. That's sort of my take on it.
It's the nature of religious testimony.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way. And it didn't really, Joe Smith actually has a book, to show people. That was his whole goal, was to have witnesses, to have a physical book, to strengthen faith.
Yeah, maybe add a bit of credibility. Yeah, strengthen, but doesn't prove. I have one last question I want to ask you, and then we're going to wrap up because you got to go. In summary, and we've kind of talked about this, but in very quick statement, what would you say that apologists do to maybe misrepresent or overemphasize the credibility of the witnesses? You could probably say our whole discussion has been about this, but what would you say? Is there anything that you think they do to maybe misrepresent them a little bit that you would just want to be like the takeaway message, if you want to say anything on that?
Well, I think they oversimplify it, and just stick with the impression that you get from reading the printed testimonies. And I think they don't. I've seen certain apologists just make it so very simple, and they leave out. They never quote Moyle.
Yeah.
They just quote, "Oh, David Whitmer says it's real," and that's. And if David Whitmer says it was real, it wasn't a vision or hallucination. So I think they make it way too simple, and it's actually more complex than it is. And we're lucky we have as much information about it that we do, because they were actually told not to talk about it, to only bear their testimonies in simple terms. And so we don't get the details, especially out of the three witnesses. We don't get the details until, way after Joseph Smith is dead even. We start getting David Whitmer being interviewed, and Martin Harris in 1859 talking about his experience. And we do have that little glimpse that Stephen Burnett provides us but they were told to just simply testify that they have seen the plates. That's what the D&C 17 says, not to elaborate, because they didn't want people, the witnesses, Joseph wanted the witnesses just to bear the simple testimony. They didn't want to go into details and then have things start being compared and start becoming weaker instead of stronger. And so I think there was that purpose in D&C 17 instructing them to do that. And one time, for a while, Harris was saying, I was told not to go into detail, but then later it seemed like they opened up and started talking more and more about it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Dan, this has been such a great interview and discussion about the Book of Mormon witnesses. I think it's been really like good discussion. It kind of shows like
Yeah.
a critic and sort of a believer can have a discussion about this, and there can be more middle ground, and we're not debating or arguing over it. I don't think that was the tone at all, and it's been really good
Very
to hear
good.
your perspective and your insights. And yeah, appreciate you coming on and having this discussion. So everyone, check out Dan Vogel. Buy his books: Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet, Book of Abraham Apologetics, Early Mormon Documents. Check out his YouTube channel, Dan Vogel, and I'll link at the end of this video his 2 videos on the Book of Mormon witnesses, where he goes in more depth there. If you've really enjoyed this video and this content, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Share this with other people and subscribe to my channel, where I try to do just fair and objective analysis to look at the critic's position and the apologist's position and have like a balanced discussion. And hopefully in the future, Dan, maybe we'll bring you back on and we'll talk about the historicity of the Book of Mormon and your take on how it was authored. I think that would be really fun as well.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, thanks everyone. And I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.